The iPhone 16 Pro is a disgustingly good device, like really flippin' good, and for so many different reasons. Yet, despite it being one of the best devices ever made, between the camera, the displays, and everything else, for about 3 weeks now, I've actually been back to using my iPhone 13 mini, which released back in 2021. And roast me all you want, or call me crazy, or somewhere in between, why do I feel compelled to go back to this 3-year-old, slower, and downright inferior iPhone even after using the 16 Pro? The simple, truthful answer is, it's tiny. Ever since the iPhone 12 Pro released, I ended up swapping that back for the iPhone 12 mini, and since then, I honestly fell ridiculously in love with the smaller iPhone. Since then though, at least year after year after year, Apple's marketing honestly hooks me right in. I always get the latest iPhone Pro device, and still I find myself just gravitating back to the mini lineup. And I know that sounds kind of dumb, getting the new iPhone every single year, but honestly, that's just something I like to do. I don't go out and spend my money on fancy jewelry, watches, clothes. I don't drink alcohol or go to bars and clubs or anything like that. I just like to put some money aside and get some new tech whenever it comes out. Is that a smart decision? I don't know. For me at least, the iPhone 13 mini might just be the exception to the new iPhone each year. Now, as for why I keep getting the new Pro iPhone each year after swapping to my mini over and over and over, well, to be honest, I think Apple quite literally might be the best in the world when it comes down to advertising and marketing, because every single year I get so caught up in the hype and I find myself gravitating to the new Pro lineup. And I don't really mean that in a bad way, since again, this is a tech channel and naturally I'm excited about all the latest and greatest tech. But honestly, between all the camera upgrades, photographic styles, ProMotion this, Bionic that, I really do get caught up in all the hype, like I'm sure a lot of other people do. And honestly, Apple has a huge stockpile of resources to help convince us to get their new iPhone every single year. Whether or not you need it, that's up to you entirely, but for me, it gets me every year. The pattern here, for me at least, is that they release a new dope-ass iPhone, I definitely check it out, the hype sort of wears off a little bit, and I do find myself going back to my 13 mini, rinse and repeat. But for any of this to make sense as to why I do keep going back to my iPhone 13 mini, it's best to sort of understand what the iPhone is to me and how I actually use it day to day. Now, just like a lot of people, it's my lifeline to my wife and 2 young children. It's where I'd love to get roasted by my homies in the group chat. It's how I check to see if those kitchen sink leftover toddler nuggets are finally hitting my waistline. If you know, you know. It's how I still manage this YouTube channel going into year 3 and reply to all your not mean comments. And for the first year and a bit, this actually was my main camera when it comes down to any sort of content creation. Apart from that, naturally, this remains the alarm that gets me up in the morning, a music player for listening to 80s ballads in the shower, alongside dozens and dozens of other things that I'm sure a lot of you also use your iPhone for. With that, whenever a new iPhone comes out, that doesn't automatically make the old ones necessarily bad in any way, shape, or form, since the way I use my iPhone, like I mentioned, it's pretty much 98% of everything that I need it to do compared to any of the Pro lineup iPhones. Obviously, it's not going to have all the new stuff like photographic styles or even Apple Intelligence, but between the size, the screen, and actually the raw power on this mini iPhone, this tiny ass iPhone has this irrational grip over me. Now, I'm going to touch on everything I love about the mini iPhone, but obviously not everything is perfect. There's 2 things I don't particularly love or hate about this iPhone, but it does make it imperfect, and that's going to be the camera and the battery life. There's an asterisk on the camera part because the camera on here is still flippin' A+. Now, as somebody who primarily works at a desk during my day job, I don't really need to worry too much about battery since I do always have a charger with me. And as a content creator, I do have other cameras now, so I don't have to lean too heavily on the actual camera on my phone. Even now though, I'm at about 90% battery health on my 13 mini, and as long as Apple has it available, I will be replacing the battery. Still, compared to the Pro lineups at least, despite still being made of aluminum instead of titanium, the 13 mini still holds up really well. It will pick up extra dings and scratches because it is a softer material, and the back still seems to be a nice durable glass. Either way, between any of the iPhones I use, I always opt to use a leather case from today's channel sponsor, Andar, to protect my device. My go-to is definitely the Aspen, which is made of full grain leather, and this is actually the highest quality grade of leather you can get, which I've been actually using the Aspen going as far back as my iPhone 12 mini. Now, as somebody who used to make their own full grain leather wallets, I really do appreciate the smell, the texture, and the simple look and feel of this case in hand, since it's one of the few cases that actually feels premium in hand, just like the iPhone out of box, all while still protecting your device. And while cases might scuff or degrade with time, the Aspen ends up getting a beautiful patina as it ages, making each case or wallet unique to the user. Between the buttons, full grain leather, camera protection, and the capture button to access, the Aspen has always been my go-to even before working with Andar. Plus, for anybody who does use the capture button on the 16 lineup, you might actually appreciate the cutout here since you can actually touch and feel the actual capture button, which is something that I did appreciate on my 16 Pro. I will have the Aspen leather case link down below in the video description if you do want to check it out. And thanks to Andar for sponsoring this portion of today's video. But now that I am back on my 13 mini, I do want to talk about the camera because yeah, it's not going to be good as the Pro lineup, obviously, but it does hold up incredibly well, even by today's standards. And I sort of mentioned it before, but even though new iPhones release, it doesn't make the old one necessarily bad, even if you are talking about the camera. And honestly, it's sort of cliche to say, but the best camera is actually the one you have. And sure, while I love my Fuji and Sony cameras, sometimes I've only got my iPhone with me, and it definitely does the job. And as much as I don't really have anything interesting to photograph, mainly because A, I'm a homebody, and B, my house is a flippin' mess, I do love the iPhone 13 mini for the photographs it does take, but I do approach it more from a cinematography standpoint, since that's something I'm always loving to practice, even if I am practicing just using an iPhone. And sure, while there's no telephoto lenses or ability to shoot log and stuff, you can most definitely make do with the light you do have, and even go as far as doing some light color grading with the footage right out of the 13 mini. Most times as well, it's honestly as simple as just underexposing your footage right out of camera to make it look a little bit less cell phony, if that makes sense. Either way, footage on here looks incredible, and again, I started this entire YouTube channel with just my 12 mini, so yeah, it does a good job. Now, apart from the battery and camera, those two departments I definitely miss from the 16 Pro, but again, what makes the 13 mini so special that I'm willing to forego all those bells and whistles on the Pro lineup to go back to my 13 mini? Honestly, it's in the flippin' name. It's the fact that it's just mini. I've gone from maining my M4 iPad Pro to primarily just using my iPad mini. Of course, I'm swapping between my Pro iPhones down to my 13 mini. And furthermore, I've actually traded in my MacBook Pro for my MacBook Air. And something I've grown to realize over the last year and a bit is that I just appreciate smaller tech, even if there's a hit to performance. With this smaller frame on the iPhone 13 mini though, it's still built incredibly well. It's sort of like a little gem in your hand, if you want to call it that. It does remind me of the OG iPhone 5, which remains one of my favorite iPhones of all time. So much so that I've nerded out and I do have one framed on my wall. And as wild as it seems, having a smaller display for me is simply better. It's more pocketable, it's easy to use one-handed, and yet it still does 95% of what all the Pro iPhones do for me on the daily. And while it's sort of lame to say, the smaller display just makes me use my phone less, which I can definitely appreciate. Honestly, between the constant expectation to be available by phone at all times and social media apps literally fighting for our constant attention, this is one of the few ways I've found successful to cut back on my screen time. That and having a minimalist setup on my phone, but I'll save that for another video. Now, when it comes down to performance and using this device day to day, again, this came out in 2021, and even by today's standards, it does an incredible job. Honestly, anything at all day to day is near instant. From flipping through apps, opening music, maps, or whatever else, it's all pretty much instant. I am sort of bummed that there's no Apple Intelligence on here, but even having tested that in the beta, it's still sort of mid because it's missing a lot of features, and pretty much right now it's just an overglorified Siri improvement, which I do appreciate, so I am kind of bummed it's not there. And while I definitely don't game on my iPhone as much as I used to, even throwing down some digital tech deck has been great on here, so there's really no complaints when it comes down to performance. And yeah, the screen is definitely smaller. That's going to be a feature or a deal breaker for you. It's a bright OLED screen that looks awesome indoors and out, and content on here really does look good. And one thing a lot of people like to complain about is the fact that the display here is only 60 Hz, but even after transitioning from 120 Hz on the Pro iPhone, you sort of notice it for maybe 20-30 minutes, and then you just don't. It's not that big a deal. And I won't pretend like the display on the Pro lineup isn't better, because it absolutely is. That is one of the best devices you can have when it comes down to the screen. But for me, it doesn't really matter in my use day to day. For me at least, I really do just appreciate a screen size where my thumb can reach edge to edge without strain. With that, I know it's definitely crazy of me to swap to the iPhone 13 mini from the 16 Pro, especially considering how much more inferior it is in pretty much every single way except size. And there's absolutely things I miss from the Pro lineup. Of course, there's the cameras, the screen, the Apple Intelligence, but honestly, in a world of constant upgrades all the time, I'm not sure I care as much as I used to. Either that, or I've sort of mentioned it before, is that I might be getting Pro device fatigue, if that's really a thing. If you slap the name Pro on enough things, it just seems a little less special. Either way, this iPhone does the job. For me, I think it just comes down to the fact that I want a smaller device in a world of larger and larger devices year over year. In the meanwhile, at least when it comes down to me needing any sort of larger displays, I love leaning into my iPad mini, more so than my M4 iPad Pro like I mentioned, and honestly, my MacBook Air still has a larger, beautiful screen if I ever need it. For now though, okay, let's not do that. For now though, the iPhone 13 mini will remain my daily driver as long as Apple lets me replace the battery. And honestly, I very rarely say actually go out and buy something, but this is sort of one of those items for anybody who might have the slimmest want of a smaller iPhone, because I think this is the very last one Apple might ever put out, unless they decide to release an iPhone SE 4 mini or something down the road. For now, this is all that's available, and I think it's all we're going to get. The pricing on these is actually pretty sweet across the board. There's going to be a lot of renewed and refurbished iPhone 13 minis. So if you do want one and you've been on the fence about it, now might be your last chance. So something to be mindful of. Either way, I appreciate you guys watching till the end. I will leave the Andar Leather Aspen link down below if you want to check it out. It is my favorite case. Appreciate you watching till the end. Till next time.